At exactly 0412 in the morning, the Persian Gulf is a mirror of black glass. For the 5,000 sailors aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, it's just another peace-through-strength patrol in a region that has been on a knife's edge since the massive strikes of 2025. There are no alarms, no frantic shouting on the bridge, and certainly no visual sign of danger. But beneath that calm surface, a mechanical heart has just started beating. A few miles off the coast, tucked away in the jagged underwater canyons of the strait, an Iranian Ghadir-class submarine has just committed an act of total defiance. The steel outer doors of its torpedo tubes have swung open, compressed air has surged, and a 2,000-pound wake-homing torpedo has begun its terminal journey toward the hull of a $13 billion American icon. This wasn't just a weapon launch. It was a test of a new reality. Since the Operation Midnight Hammer strikes last June, the world has wondered if the U.S. Navy is truly untouchable, or if its carriers are just massive floating targets waiting for a lucky shot. For the Iranian commanders watching their tactical screens, this was their David and Goliath moment. They believed the silence of the Gulf would protect them. They believed their reverse-engineered Soviet tech could outsmart the most advanced sensors on the planet. But as that torpedo began to ride the carrier's turbulent wake, the countdown to a localized catastrophe for the Iranian Navy had already reached its final seconds. What happened next wasn't a battle. It was a cold, calculated execution of superior technology that proved one terrifying thing. If you can see the target, you've already lost the war. The Persian Gulf is widely considered the most difficult place on Earth for sonar operators. It's shallow, it's salty, and it's incredibly loud. Thousands of commercial tankers, fishing dhows, and cargo ships create a constant grinding background noise that makes traditional submarine hunting nearly impossible. This was the foundation of the Iranian plan. They didn't use a massive nuclear-powered submarine that gives off a heat signature like a small sun. Instead, they used the Ghadir class, a midget sub, barely the size of a school bus, powered by quiet diesel-electric engines. These ships are designed to sit on the sea floor, perfectly still, blending in with the rocks and debris until their target passes overhead. The Iranian crew believed that by staying bottomed out and waiting for the Abraham Lincoln to cross a specific GPS coordinate, they had achieved the ultimate tactical surprise. To them, the massive carrier was a loud, lumbering giant that couldn't possibly hear a single torpedo launch amidst the mechanical symphony of the strait. They banked on the idea that the U.S. Navy's reliance on high-tech would be its downfall in such a low-tech environment. But this was their first and most fatal mistake. They were operating on 20th century assumptions in a 2026 battle space. The U.S. Navy doesn't just listen with sonar anymore. It uses a multi-layered web of system of systems, high-altitude drones with MAD sensors, seabed hydrophones linked by fiber optics, and even orbital satellites that can detect the microscopic bulge in the water's surface caused by a moving submarine. Long before that torpedo ever left the tube, the Lincoln Strike Group already had a digital twin of that sub on their displays. They weren't being hunted. They were being invited into a trap. When that torpedo entered the water at 041219, the response wasn't human. It was algorithmic. Inside the Lincoln's Combat Information Center, the Aegis combat system didn't wait for an officer to make a decision. The system's AI, recently upgraded following the 2025 Red Sea skirmishes, identified the acoustic signature of the torpedo in less than 3 seconds. It didn't just see a threat. It identified it as a Hoot torpedo, a high-speed Russian-origin weapon capable of 200 knots. The computer instantly calculated the closing speed, the salinity of the water, and the exact impact point, frame 128, right near the ship's secondary propulsion. The vampire call echoed through the ship, but by the time the words were out, the ship's defense systems were already slaved to the target. In naval warfare, we talk about the OODA loop, Observe, orient, decide, act. Humans take seconds to go through that loop. Aegis does it in milliseconds. The crew of the Lincoln didn't panic because they didn't have to. They knew that for the torpedo to hit, it had to navigate a gauntlet of non-kinetic barriers that the Iranians hadn't even dreamed of. The clock was ticking, but the US Navy owned every second of that countdown. While the torpedo was still miles away, the carrier's electronic warfare suite began to flood the water with deceptive signals. Every sensor on that torpedo was suddenly being told that the carrier was 500 yards to the left, then 1,000 yards to the right, then directly behind it. It was like trying to find a door in a room made of mirrors while being blinded by a strobe light. The Iranians thought they were firing a carrier killer. In reality, they were firing a blind man into a maze. As the torpedo closed the distance, the Lincoln deployed its most guarded secret, the Ghost Fleet Protocol. Most people have heard of the Nixie, the towed decoy that mimics the sound of a ship, but by 2026, the Navy had moved on to something far more mysterious. They deployed the LEAD, the long-endurance electronic decoy. These are autonomous, uncrewed underwater vehicles that don't just make noise, they recreate the entire physical signature of a Nimitz-class carrier. They emit the same magnetic field, the same thermal displacement, and the same wake turbulence. To the Iranian torpedo's guidance system, the Abraham Lincoln suddenly split into 4 different ships, all moving in different directions. This is the saturation defense that the US has perfected. While the real carrier maintained its course with ice-cold confidence, these ghosts led the torpedo on a wild goose chase. At the same time, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the escort screen were launching Nulka decoys into the air. While Nulka is primarily for missiles, in this 2026 scenario, they were used to jam the submarine's uplink to its weapon. You see, modern torpedoes often rely on a thin copper wire to receive updates from the sub. By using targeted micropulses, the US destroyers were able to sever that connection without firing a single shot. The torpedo was now unhomed, a multi-million-dollar piece of junk wandering aimlessly in the deep. The Iranian sub-crew, hearing the pings of their own weapon losing lock, began to realize that their master stroke had become a suicide note. They were no longer the hunters. They were the only loud thing left in a sea full of American ghosts. Stopping the torpedo was only the first half of the lesson. The US Navy's doctrine is clear: neutralize and remove. From the deck of the USS Preble, one of the strike group's destroyers, a RUM-139 vertical launch ASROC anti-submarine rocket tore into the sky. It's a terrifying sight. A rocket that carries a torpedo as its payload. It flew in a high arc, miles above the ocean, before releasing a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo by parachute directly over the last known coordinates of the Iranian sub. This is the moment where challenges become untold stories. The Mark 54 doesn't need to hit the submarine's hull to destroy it. It uses a terrifying piece of physics known as the gas bubble effect. When the torpedo explodes beneath the submarine, it creates a massive vacuum of high-pressure gas. This bubble lifts the submarine out of the water, and as the bubble collapses, the weight of the ocean crashes down, snapping the submarine's pressure hull like a toothpick. There is no fire, no explosions like in the movies, just a sudden, catastrophic structural failure. At 04:24 a.m., the acoustic sensors on the Lincoln recorded the breaking up sounds of the Iranian Ghadir. The sub didn't have time to surrender. It didn't have time to offload its crew. In less than 12 minutes from the initial launch, the threat had been erased from the tactical map. The ocean simply swallowed the remains, and for a moment, the silence returned. But for the commanders in Tehran, the silence was about to be broken by the sound of supersonic jets. The US Navy doesn't just defend its carriers, it punishes the infrastructure that allows an attack to happen. This is a strategy called left of launch. Following the Operation Midnight Hammer strikes of June 2025, which decimated Iran's nuclear sites, the rules of engagement had shifted. Within 30 minutes of the torpedo launch, A strike package of Fa-18 Super Hornets and F-35C Lightning IIs was catapulted from the Lincoln. Their targets weren't the Iranian people, they were the nodes of the IRGC Navy. Using advanced anti-radiation missiles, A-arms, the jets targeted every coastal radar site and command and control bunker along the Hormuz coast. These missiles are smart. They remember where a radar was, even if the operators turn it off in a panic. One by one, the eyes of the Iranian military went dark. Bunker-busting bombs, similar to the 30,000-pound GBU-57s used in the 2025 strikes, were dropped on the submarine pens in Bandar Abbas. The goal wasn't to start a third world war, it was to ensure that Iran couldn't repeat this provocation for another decade. The speed of the retaliation was designed to shock the Iranian leadership. While they were still waiting for news of their successful torpedo hit, their entire naval surveillance network was being systematically dismantled. By the time the sun finally rose at 05:30 a.m., Iran had lost its most elite submarine unit, its primary coastal radars, and its ability to monitor the very waters it calls its backyard. By the time the news reached the global markets, the engagement was already over. This is the strategic cost that isn't measured in dollars. In the following days, the recent rumors of a full-scale war began to circulate, but the reality was handled behind closed doors in Oman. The U.S. didn't release a criminal accusation against the Iranian government. They simply handed over the digital logs and the satellite footage of the launch. It was an exposed moment for the regime. Their carrier killer narrative was dead. The 2026 National Defense Strategy had already noted that the Iranian regime was weakened by domestic protests and the 2025 bombings, and this failed naval stunt was the final nail in the coffin for their regional influence. The Abraham Lincoln continued its patrol, its crew eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. This is the true definition of information dominance. It's not about how many ships you have, it's about deciding the outcome of the battle before the first shot is even fired. The Iranian crew of that sub thought they were starting a revolution. Instead, they were just another glowing data point in an American computer system. The world watched, and the message was received by every other adversary in the region. If you fire on a U.S. carrier, you don't start a war. You simply reveal your own obsolescence. We live in an era where sensational headlines tell us that the age of the aircraft carrier is over, that drones and cheap torpedoes have made these $13 billion ships exposed and vulnerable. But as the 14-minute engagement of the USS Abraham Lincoln proved, a carrier isn't just a ship. It's the center of a God-eye network that sees through the mysterious depths of the ocean and the shocking chaos of electronic warfare. The Iranians didn't fail because they weren't brave or because their torpedoes didn't work. They failed because they tried to fight a 21st century ghost with 20th century steel. The carrier killer myth is exactly that. A myth designed to provide a false sense of security to those who don't understand the real-world gap in information technology. As the Lincoln sails toward the horizon, its mission remains unchanged: to be a peace-through-strength reminder that in the modern world, the most dangerous weapon isn't the one you fire, it's the one you never see coming. If you want to see more deep dives into the exposed tech that keeps the world's superpowers on top, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We're tracking the untold stories of the 2026 Naval Theater, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. What do you think? Is the carrier still the king, or is there a hidden threat we haven't seen yet? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, stay sharp.